you will witness for the first time the most incredible sight of all.
In 1958, Disney staged one of the biggest and darkest nature myths people still believe today.
The March of the Lemming, an unaccountable mass suicide.
Turns out that's a total lie, one that Disney purposefully faked.
There's never been any record of it. Committing suicide or jumping off cliffs.
But they didn't just stage this myth. Disney manufactured the footage to make it feel true.
Those lemmings didn't jump in. They were pushed or thrown.
We've lost a few lemmings, okay.
And this gnarly footage is only half of the story. The real question is how Disney got the world to believe it, and how that very deception is still at work today. So how did Disney, of all studios, end up making nature documentaries?
There's one question everyone seems to ask about our true life adventures. It's how do we manage to pry into the private lives of the animals?
Because before they could sell the lemming myth, they first had to become one of the most trusted names in nature. But educational wildlife films just didn't fit what Disney was making in the 1940s.
From the very start, Dumbo was a happy picture.
But animation was slow, expensive, and every release was a gamble Disney couldn't afford to keep losing. Throughout the 40s, too many of those big bets hadn't paid off, leaving Disney under serious financial pressure.
The banker, I think, was losing more sleep than I was.
This all changed in 1946, when Walt Disney saw Alaska wildlife footage from Alfred and Elma Malott, a husband and wife team who had spent years in the Alaska wilderness collecting footage. This footage fascinated Walt. Not only did it scratch his itch of exploring the disappearing frontier, but it also presented an opportunity, even if he wasn't totally sure what kind. What was clear was that Disney's storytelling at the time was unmatched. Also clear? It was a whole lot cheaper to work in live action, especially if it was using someone else's footage. And this was Disney's dangerous magic. They could take real nature, shape it into a story, and make the result feel true, even when it wasn't.
At last, our artists had the authentic action and inspiration they'd been looking for.
For Walt, all of this was enough to take a chance on. He offered the Malotts a deal. Go back to Alaska for one more year, film everything they could, and he'd buy the footage and figure out the rest later.
Walt Disney, in this case, purchased the footage they wanted. They hadn't decided exactly what they wanted to do, but we took lots of pictures because we figured we never knew what would fit in or what we were going to get next.
But 1 year later, the footage that Walt selected wasn't exactly what the Malotts or anyone else expected. And it's what the studio did with this footage that catapulted Disney to the award stage, while also planting the seed for the lemming lie.
Never before has the screen presented such moments of dramatic ferocity and suspense.
So how did Disney become the gold standard for nature films? And why would they use that trust to bend the truth? When Walt previewed the endless reels of film that the husband and wife duo had captured, it was footage of playful seals, completely undisturbed by humanity, that really got his imagination going. He had the Malotts gather up all their seal footage and sent it to a newly formed team within the studio. A team responsible for taking many of the techniques that had succeeded within the studio's animation and applying it to create everything from a narrated story to a soundtrack.
There was a term that was used a lot in the early days of scoring animation, and that was called Mickey Mousing. The Disney studio, through the Mickey Mouse cartoons, came up with a way of underscoring not just the scene or the idea of the scene, but each action.
Here's a bull grabbing a wife for himself.
Before long, the team had pieced together their first experimental true life adventure with 1948's Seal Island. Seal Island became the template, and over the next 5 years, Disney cranked out 6 more true life shorts that won 4 more Oscars.
The winner is Walt Disney.
Walt Disney. Walt Disney. Walt Disney Productions.
That success didn't just make true life popular. It taught audiences that when Disney showed them nature, they were looking at the truth.
Well, I just want to say on behalf of my staff, and especially the naturalist photographers who have played such a great part in making the nature films, many, many thanks.
The shorts grew into feature-length films, and the success continued. Much of what True Life captured was genuinely groundbreaking. The thing was, As Disney's nature films grew more extravagant, the team behind the scenes often had to get creative with their own imaginations and stretch the truth to make everything work.
We need a sound. We got to have a sound for this jackass penguin. And I watched the thing, and I saw that his little chest would do this. And then, a thing like that. And now, jackass penguins, whether they make a sound or not, I don't know. But this was in the picture, and that's what jackass penguins sound like.
And before too long, not everyone was buying the true life part. In a review of 1953's The Living Desert, the New York Times calls out that, while it's entertaining, the selective editing and playful soundtrack make the film feel more like a cartoon than a true-to-life documentary. But that was just a taste of what was to come with Perry, Disney's 5th true-life feature film. This time, the studio pushed beyond true-life adventure and into something they called a true-life fantasy.
In bringing Perry to the motion picture screen, we feel we've come upon something quite different in movie making. We call it a true-life fantasy, a combination of fact and fiction.
On the surface, this may sound like a small shift, but for the True Life series, this changed everything. Instead of shaping stories out of footage that had already been captured, Perry treated wildlife like actors in a pre-written story.
What you do is you create a set, in effect, in nature. You just sort of fence off a part of the forest. The easiest things to do were things like the marten chases, where the marten was the arch villain in the piece and chased squirrels all over the forest and ate a number of them.
Perry only experienced mid-tier success, which is likely what showed Disney that fantasy had a ceiling, at least for true life. So they pivoted back to what looked like their documentary roots.
Nature's last stronghold. Never before photographed so intimately, so revealingly.
But even though fantasy had been removed from the title, much of that storytelling remained. And it's exactly that storytelling that pushed both Disney and a horde of cuddly lemmings into recreating one of nature's biggest myths.
With literally millions of these little creatures plunging to self-destruction. Why? No one knows.
Just 1 year after Perry, Disney returned to form with White Wilderness, a seemingly traditional true-life adventure, all fully narrated and set to the usual super silly and highly dramatic soundtrack. Midway through the film, though, we're innocently introduced to one of Disney's most controversial segments.
Here's an actual living legend. For it's said of this tiny animal that it commits mass suicide by rushing into the sea in droves.
The narrator describes how, every so often, lemmings experience a large growth in population, which reduces their food supply and forces them to new feeding grounds. But before too long, their goal shifts into something a bit more sinister.
By now, the lemmings have forgotten the original idea of food. They've become victims of an obsession, a one-track thought. Move on. Move on. Keep moving on.
It's this drive that pushes the lemmings through predator nests, down rough terrain, and right to the edge of the cliffs overlooking the ocean.
They reach the final precipice. This is the last chance to turn back. Yet over they go, casting themselves bodily out into space.
But according to True Life Adventures, this isn't even the end for these lemmings. Because it's not the fall that kills them, it's their obsession to keep swimming onward through the endless ocean.
But gradually, strength wanes. Determination ebbs away. And soon the Arctic Sea is dotted with tiny bobbing bodies.
Even with Disney positioning this mass lemming suicide as occasional and unintentional, we already know this isn't true. Remember,
There's never been any record of it committing suicide or jumping off cliffs.
And in the 1960s, scientists knew it too. But the public? They had already been conditioned to believe this myth, long before Disney presented it as something true to life. Many decades earlier, we can find descriptions of hordes of lemmings jumping into the sea, only to end up in a watery grave. An explanation offered in an 1877 issue of Popular Science's Monthly suggested the rodents were being drawn to the mythical submerged continent of Lemuria.
Curiously, many ancient peoples shared the same story of a long-lost, sunken civilization, Lemuria.
Disney themselves played around with the lemming myth in the form of a 1955 comic book, The Lemming with the Locket. And while a story about these furry little creatures stealing from Scrooge McDuck before jumping off a cliff was clearly written as fiction, just 3 years later, Disney's True Life cameras would present the exact same behavior as an unquestionable fact of nature. But what's devious is how White Wilderness blurs the line between myth and truth.
The story is one of the persistent tales of the Arctic. And as often happens in man's nature lore, it's a story both true and false, as we shall see in a moment.
Then it shows what looks like hundreds of lemmings jumping off cliffs and dying in the waters below. According to Disney, the myth isn't that this happens, it's that all this mass death is intentional, and instead a part of nature's design.
Except that nature, in her infinite wisdom, has spared a few. Back on the Arctic plain, there remains the small handful that did not make this fatal journey. And yet, when the population cycle mounts to another peak, the lemming legend will be told again, and will come to this same amazing climax, a final rendezvous with destiny and with death.
When White Wilderness premiered in 1958, audiences loved it. The Academy awarded it an Oscar, and critics called it masterful, even singling out the lemming segment as eerie and hypnotic. But it would take almost 25 years for the shocking mechanics behind that lemming lie to finally be exposed.
My memory of it, watching it, told me that they were doing something like that. I didn't know what, because you never see offstage what's going on, if the cameraman's smart enough.
During that time in between, the shape of True Life Adventures dramatically shifted. After White Wilderness, Disney released one more standalone feature before chopping the series up into educational shorts and segments for the weekly Disneyland TV show.
Adventureland, the wonder world of nature's own realm.
All of this only made True Life feel more official, like what you were watching was fact, on film. But in 1982, the Canadian investigative series The Fifth Estate dropped a bombshell that put everything Disney had built with True Life Adventures in question. The most surprising part of it is that the people pulling back the curtain were the very filmmakers who had helped create the illusion in the first place.
The Disney people were nice to work for, but I didn't really enjoy working on the films. They built a set. It looked like the Arctic, and a nice painted sky for a background, and they made a little thing like a turntable and ran the lemmings around.
That infamous lemming death scene? We've already heard.
They were pushed or thrown.
And it wasn't just the action that was fake. The scale and even the location were too.
Now the scene showed dozens, hundreds of lemmings.
It's the same lemmings over and over again.
Falling into a body of water, purportedly the Arctic Ocean.
Yeah, that was the Bow River.
The Arctic Sea.
That was the Bow River.
And Roy E. Disney, Walt's nephew and a True Life crew member, makes it clear that this wasn't much of a surprise.
Well, there was a time when we were presenting a lot of footage that we knew was staged as having occurred naturally. Whether or not Walt ever knew that that sort of thing was happening, I really wouldn't know. He was a pretty smart fellow, and he may have made some good guesses that it could happen.
So why manufacture scenes like this at all? And why acknowledge the myth, only to double down and show it as fact? Because after being backed by Disney's True Life Authority, the lie didn't stay in the film. It lived on as a fact for decades. But it turns out, the lemming lie revealed something bigger about how Disney tells stories.
Since the beginning of mankind, the fable tellers have not only given us entertainment, but a kind of wisdom, humor, and understanding that, like all true art, remains imperishable through the ages.
Looking back, Disney's real gift has always been making carefully shaped stories feel like truth. From Walt's obsession with believable animation...
In Snow White, we had to have this believable carriage. I had to have a model that could pick up the ideas we wanted for the gestures and the movements and all of that. And then I photographed her and let that be a guide for the artist.
To Disneyland, where structures and animatronics are constructed to create a believable illusion within a physical space.
Here age relives fond memories of the past, and here youth may savor the challenge and promise of the future.
All the way to True Life Adventures. The lemming sequence wasn't an accident. It's what happens when a brand is built to make fantasy feel believable, even when it has to bend the facts. And that same story first instinct still shows up today in the parks, in the films, and even in their modern take on the true life adventures formula.
Unexpected trouble will put them in danger, and Maya and her family will need a new place to call home.
The plausible impossible means taking something that is against the laws of nature, something impossible, and making it appear rational and acceptable.
And if you think Disney's lemming myth is shocking, wait until you check out what they buried in Mickey Mouse's early adventures.